a squadron of long-range bombers to destroy the skyline of New York City. A tank with a tonnage of 1,000 is said to be the biggest ever made. A radio-guided bomb that has a success rate that is 80 times greater than that of its enemies. It was never properly clear what kind of weaponry Adolf Hitler had in his phantom arsenal, but it becomes more clear that the Allies brought an end to the conflict with Germany barely in the nick of time, as records about German plans and the development of new weapons are uncovered. The dangers faced were many and terrible. During World War I, the German military was able to produce some of the most deadly technologies in the world. However, the Messerschmitt 264 bomber, commonly known as the America bomber, may have been even more mysterious and hence more impressive in his efforts. Hitler sought to surpass the aviation technology that was available at the time with his planned jet, even though no aircraft could at the time fly non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean without stopping to refuel. The four-engine bomber could carry a 6.5-ton bomb load, and Hitler had high hopes that it would be able to launch an attack on the United States. Flying from France, German planes would fly across the Atlantic Ocean and drop their bombs on New York City before making the return trip to Europe. 3 prototypes of the aircraft were reportedly created as Hitler got obsessed with the concept. While the German Air Force began attacking East Coast industries in April 1942, all Messerschmitt prototypes were destroyed by Allied air assaults in July 1944. The project was not truly one that could be carried out. In the year 1942, it was little more than a war game, and among the Nazis, Hitler was the only one who showed any serious interest in putting this plan into action. In the same year, Hitler issued instructions for the construction of a tank that was given the code name the Mouse. Despite its humble name, the tank weighed about 190 tons. It was also overshadowed by another of Hitler's favorite projects, the Land Cruiser P-1000, codenamed the Rat. If made, the Rat tank had the potential to exert an enormous amount of killing power. The Rat was planned to weigh 1,000 tons, stretch 114 feet in length, and be considered by some to be the biggest tank that has ever been made. Because the missile fired from the Rat tank had such a massive diameter, the amount of damage it could do would have been utterly staggering. It required many feet of concrete, delivered a powerful explosion, and had an unparalleled killing power. However, the enormous wonder suffered from one mega-sized flaw, and that was its mobility. They were unable to go on highways with it, and they were unable to cross bridges with it. Although it might theoretically cross a river, but its ability to do so would depend on whether or not it had sufficient positive displacement and positive buoyancy to remain at the river's surface and avoid submerging. Therefore, in the grand scheme of things, it was more of a dream than anything else. Reportedly, the German Minister of Weapons at the time put a stop to that goal by declaring that it was not the most efficient way to employ the diminishing resources available. However, some of Hitler's fantasy technologies did eventually make their way into the real world, and many believe that one of his most devastating bombs, the Fritz X bomber, could well have had the ability to alter the course of history. In 1943, the Fritz X precision bomber saw its first action in battle for the first time. According to the testing of its prototype, the Fritz X had a success rate that was 80 times greater than that of other free-falling bombs available at the time. In September of 1943, a radio-guided bomb was used in an attack on the Roma, which was one of the largest battleships in the Italian Navy. The ship went down after taking 2 direct strikes in only 35 minutes, taking 1,200 men with it. A couple of days later, Hitler shifted his focus to the United States Navy and set his sights on the cruiser USS Savannah, which was used by the United States military for landing operations in southern Italy. However, the bomb did not bring the ship to the seabed. Rather, it had another result. The Fritz X came down and penetrated the roof of the number 3 gun turret on the Savannah. It skimmed off the breech of the center of the gun of the turret, went down through the handling areas, and burst in the magazine as it emerged out of the bottom of the vessel. This was a very fortunate thing for the Savannah, because if it had been confined inside the magazine, and the magazine had entirely exploded, this would have surely torn the ship in two. In later incidents that were recorded, the bomber's force was so great that it was able to smash straight through the ship, detonating only after it exited the ship or in the sea. As a result, some military historians have pondered whether or not the bomb had a flaw in its design that rendered it technically, or if it was just overpowered for its day. Therefore, a test was required. So, a group performed tests of the Fritz X bomb in the California desert. Holger Bull, a German model maker who specializes in creating life-size replicas of weapons used during World War II, collaborated with aviation specialists from the United States to recreate the Fritz X bomber and test it in the California desert. After repairing the Fritz X, including the bomber's internal electronics, Bull and Wiper joined together with Chino, an aero trader in California. Together, they returned the Fritz X to its original configuration. Following the delivery of 2 copies of the Fritz X by Bull and Wiper to their airbase, the German-American team worked together to find out how to load the replicas into a B-25 bomber. Though the Fritz X warhead was not filled with explosives, the team designed an experiment to figure out the ballistics and destructive power of the reconstructed Nazi bomb. They started by outlining the Roma battleship on the desert, which was more than 780 feet long and more than 100 feet wide, and then they attempted to drop the Fritz X replicas one at a time onto the target. The experiment was a success, even though the team was off by a few dozens of yards from the intended destination. It was clear from the intensity with which the bomb exploded that the destructive potential of the Fritz X was beyond what the battleships of World War II could handle. One of the team members did the math, and they determined that the bomb was moving at around 290 miles per hour when it struck the ground. Following the impact, 7 feet of the bomb's overall length of 11 feet was buried below. Not only did the Germans have pilotless aircraft and bombers, but they also had miniature bomb vehicles. The Goliath. It was a German disposable small tracked vehicle meant to deliver an explosive warhead by remote control. The vehicle itself was miniature and controlled. There were 2 variations, one that was driven by batteries and could carry a charge of up to 60 kilograms, and another that was powered by a bigger gasoline engine and could transport 100 kilograms up to 650 meters away from the controller. If the chance presented itself, Goliath was to be deployed against hostile bunkers, structures, and even enemy personnel and vehicles. Minefields were cleared with the help of some of them. The Germans were at a disadvantage since the vehicle they were using was both sluggish and had a limited ground clearance. Additionally, the trailing control cables were susceptible to being severed. Between April 1942 and September 1944, 2,650 were made. However, they were only sometimes successful. The Germans also conducted research and development on bigger radio-controlled vehicles that could dump a charge near to their desired target and then retreat to a safe distance. Nevertheless, these experiments were also a waste of money. Obviously, Hitler did not like small things in his military, so the Schwerer Gustav, the German railway gun. During the First World War, German forces deployed a massive railway-mounted cannon to shell Paris. In 1936, Adolf Hitler resurrected the idea of such a massive weapon when he asked the Krupp armaments what kind of cannon might demolish the Maginot Line's defenses. The gun was given the name Schwerer Gustav. The 80-centimeter cannon weighed 1,350 tons and could fire a 7-ton projectile 29 miles. It wasn't finished in time for the German army's assault on France in May of 1940, therefore, they failed to use it. When it was made, the cannon was given the name Dora by the artillery battalion that was given responsibility for it in January of 1942. It fired 47 rounds of ammunition onto the city of Sevastopol in the Soviet Union. Schwerer Gustav II, the second cannon made by Krupp, was never sent into combat throughout its production run. In March of 1943, Schwerer Gustav II was moved to an artillery firing range of Rügenwalde for storage. The increased efficacy of aerial bombardment during the Second World War made these large guns obsolete. Hitler's goal was not only to demolish the physical infrastructure of the country, rather he intended to crush the will of the people. General Walter Weaver, who was serving as chief of staff of the newly formed Luftwaffe, was killed in an airplane accident in 1936. He had been Germany's leading proponent of strategic bombing, conquering an enemy nation by the methodical assault on that nation's economy and people. It was a concept that was gaining traction in Britain, which was in the process of developing new heavy bombers for the Royal Air Force Bomber Command. Existing plans for a long-range bomber in Germany, on the other hand, were scrapped as a result of Weaver's passing, as well as a shortage of financial resources. Instead, the focus was placed on more maneuverable aircraft, particularly dive bombers. On the battlefield, assisting the army was the primary responsibility of the Luftwaffe dive bombers. As the war continued, Germany's absence of a strategic bomber force to strike back at the industries of the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union was acutely felt. Only one of a variety of new four-engine aircraft, the Heinkel HE-177, ever saw combat duty after a series of belated efforts to bring them into service were unsuccessful. The scientists working for Hitler had a philosophy of leaving no stone unturned, so they turned to wind to provide them with weapons. The Windkanone, or the wind cannon, was a peculiar anti-aircraft weapon developed in Germany. It had a big barrel that was bowed upwards at one end, while the other end was open. Through the open end of the barrel, an explosive jet of compressed air was shot upwards when a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen was ignited. The objective was to shoot down planes that were flying at a low altitude. Even though tests show that a strong slug of high-velocity air might cause damage to ground structures, it was uncertain whether or not it would have required impact against a small aircraft traveling at a high speed. In 1945, a wind cannon was installed on a bridge over the River Elbe, but it failed to achieve any results. The end effect of all of these weapons, whether they were used in battle or not, was that the Nazis squandered a significant amount of resources, both financial and technological, in the creation and production of bizarre weapons that provided very little or no benefit in terms of battle strategy. In the fires of World War II, some of Germany's best brains worked feverishly to develop horrific new weapons of mass devastation. A spaceship that could travel across the Atlantic Ocean without being seen, and a death ray that was straight out of science fiction rockets, flying saucers, or even an atomic bomb. After 8 decades, long-hidden Nazi archives unearthed the secret plans for these and many more dreadful wonder weapons, revealing information that had been kept hidden for more than half a century. These masterpieces represent Germany's technological lead and a last-ditch effort to achieve their goals of winning the war, establishing global dominance for a millennium, and terrifying the United States and its allies. Nazis knew they cannot win the war with the masses, and if the Nazi dictatorship had tried to win the war based on numbers alone, they would have had a terrible time convincing anybody. Throughout the war, Germany fielded some 13.6 million soldiers. Russia alone fielded nearly 3 times that, at 34.5 million. Not to mention the American, British, and Canadian troops ready to open up the Western Front. Their only chance was to have better technology than everyone else. More importantly, they knew it was the only way to convince their people they still had a chance. The Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda, the Nazis' propaganda office, spun some incredible stories of these superweapons, or Wunderwaffen, that were about to save the German war effort. The Germans invested a lot of time and effort into the evolution of rocket technology, science, and other fields of study. As a result, the country became a world leader in this area, while the rest of the world lagged far behind. The Nazi leadership reigned its physicists, chemists, and their support personnel with a tremendous amount of compensation, gave them the most advanced research facilities in Europe, and ordered them to design the most lethal weapons the world had ever seen. The engineers came up with very bold ideas and designs. One of them was the delta-winged Leipzig P-13, a vertical takeoff roto-winged warplane half a century ahead of its time, a flying aircraft carrier, and the Silbervogel, a Silverbird supersonic suborbital spacecraft capable of bringing the Blitz to Broadway. They could have carried out a one-sided assault on the United States, ditched their aircraft in the ocean, and then dropped a few tons of cargo on New York. The United States of America had no defenses that could have stopped them in any case. Even if Silverbird never left the drawing board, the puzzle of how German scientists managed to get so far ahead of their rivals would still linger. What's the science behind these machines? And how close does the genius of Nazi science bring Adolf Hitler to the brink of victory? At the beginning of World War II, Hitler's blitzkrieg swept through a defenseless Europe. Germany was the first modern country to invest heavily in the notion that advancements in science and technology were the quickest route to global dominance. Dramatic weapon systems had an effect on Hitler and affected his decisions. The Germans often adhered to the notion that quality was more important than quantity, and they believed that providing products of greater quality would swing the balance of power. This was just more of Hitler's ideology in action. Hitler had used science to create, test, and deploy a succession of interesting and terrifying innovations. From highly advanced long-range ballistic missiles to jet fighters that were the first to join the war, to a stealth-designed monoplane right out of Star Wars, decades before America's B-2 stealth bomber, and even kamikaze bombs for a pilot's one-way flight, the Allies were not ready. When compared to what the Germans had available, the American missile development projects throughout the war were quite basic and rudimentary. To keep their edge and ever advancing, the Nazis maintained a top-secret complex consisting of labs and airfields on a lonely and secluded island in the Baltic Sea. The peaceful beach town of Panama was the venue for their most top-secret scientific research, which they hoped would pave the way for the aviation era and the space age. Many of us believe the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, was used to end the war, but in fact, Nazis were way ahead of that. In 1938, German physicists in Berlin were the first to discover fission, the splitting of the atom, and the basic process behind nuclear weapons. Even though World War II had not yet begun at the time, the achievement created a great deal of concern in the United States. Would the Germans go on to develop an atomic weapon if they had the technology to split the atom? This worry eventually resulted in the establishment of the Manhattan Project, which was a covert initiative undertaken by the United States government to develop a nuclear weapon. German scientists, headed by the physicist Werner Heisenberg, had already jumped the gun on developing a nuclear weapon, and they had begun stockpiling the uranium needed to power their device. In the final months of World War II, it was becoming more likely that Germany would be defeated. D-Day The Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, created a second front, and the Allies immediately started capturing a number of key German sites. By August 25, 1944, Paris had been freed, and shortly afterward, Romania and Bulgaria had also surrendered. But the Nazis had no intention of quitting without a fight, and without causing as much damage as they could on the Allied forces. To do so, they employed or planned to employ an increasingly deadly array of military weapons, from ballistic missiles to rocket planes to perhaps the atomic bomb. The governments of the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia were not willing to just wait around to be defeated by the more modern technology. It was imperative to find these weapons and the scientists and engineers who developed them, so commando and agent teams were sent well in advance of the battle lines to search across Germany. Since the United States administration had no means of knowing how close the Germans were to completing their bomb project, they decided to launch a theatrical expedition after D-Day to search Germany for the atomic bomb project, Heisenberg and his team, and the uranium. The mission, manned by a crack team of agents and led by Lieutenant Colonel Boris T. Pash, was codenamed Alsos, the Greek word for grove, in honor of General Leslie R. Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project. And that is how the United States got access to the atomic bomb blueprint. They never had a solid breakthrough. Instead, they used what the Nazis had left. To prevent the Soviet Union and other forces from capturing scientists and military technology deemed to be so advanced by the Nazis, the United States Army sent reconnaissance teams inside Germany in the last phases of the war. The endeavor, which was known as Project Paperclip, was successful in securing V-2 missiles, as well as crucial personnel like Werner von Braun, the notorious aerospace engineer who built the V-2 and later designed the Saturn V rocket for NASA's Apollo program. Failure was not a choice for the British and American agents working on this operation. In the aftermath of the war, the globe was already beginning to feel the chill of the approaching Cold War. If they didn't manage to capture the Nazi technology and scientists, operatives of the emerging Soviet Union would, and this might signal calamity for the world. The Allies brought an end to the war with Germany barely in the nick of time, judging by the amount of information that has been uncovered about German plans and the progress they had made with new weapons. The risks that everyone, but especially Britain, was exposed to were enormous and many. The Nazis may have lost World War II, but they won an almost mythological reputation for their technologically advanced weaponry. Tanks produced by the Nazis were commonly superior to those made by the Allies. Luftwaffe fighter pilots took to the skies before their Allied counterparts did, and the V for Vengeance series of terror weapons, which included the V-1 cruise missile and the V-2 ballistic missile, was terrifying but strategic and tactical uncertain.